Welcome to Soundtrack Your Life, a podcast about soundtracks, music, and movies. Each episode features a guest and focuses on a specific soundtrack and the personal stories connected to it. Now here's your host, Ryan Pack.
Well, welcome to Soundtrack Your Life, the soundtrack podcast. Today we're going to talk about the 1983 movie Valley Girl with Damon Gross. You may remember Damon from the first episode. If you skipped over the first episode, this is your first encounter with Damon. He is my bandmate in Joy Luck Division. He's also the frontman of the tiki music band, the Poo Poo Platters, and he was also the frontman of the Visitors Queue, who you can find on Spotify. He's also a soundtrack playlist extraordinaire, and Valley Girl is actually one of the playlists that he curates on Spotify and Apple Music.
Hey, Ryan.
Hey, Damon. Welcome back.
Yeah, this Valley Girl soundtrack, this has got to be my number one most popular playlist. So when I heard you were starting this podcast, I knew it would be a perfect soundtrack to talk about.
Yeah, and it's reading about the soundtrack. It's one that's highly sought out of, but it was actually never released because they didn't have the budget for it.
Yeah, I noticed that. There was a collectible LP out there with a handful of songs from this movie. I guess it made it into the hands of some people, but it was never officially released. Is that right?
From what I read, they had to pull it because the soundtrack budget went basically haywire. The budget for the entire movie was $350K, and the way they wanted the soundtrack, it was going to cost another like $250K. So almost the same budget as the actual film.
Jeez, that's a lot of dough. What do you think $350,000 is adjusted for 2020?
I don't know, like 2 million maybe?
Sure.
Like, still a low budget film.
Man. So that would mean if you were making a movie today, it costs $2 million, and then they're like, oh, well, if you want any music for it, it's going to cost you $1.5 million.
Right.
Something like that.
So I can understand why it was kind of shelved, but the movie ended up making $17 million. So basically the movie made 50 times its budget, which is incredible.
That's pretty good. And speaking of shelved, I would like to segue into talking about Valley Girl. I'll call it Valley Girl 2020. There was a remake of the movie that came out this year. I think it had been shelved since 2017. Right. And in the midst of the pandemic, I think they secretly just decided to throw that out there onto streaming services. That's there if you want to check that out.
Yeah, I believe they probably threw it out there because the original 1983 film hit streaming services or hit digital platforms for the first time ever, and they probably thought it would be nice to piggyback off that to get suckers like you to watch it, Damon.
Oh yeah, I watched both just recently. I hadn't seen the first one in, I'd say, maybe 20 or 25 years almost. I had seen it quite a few times. I did have the option streaming that I could have purchased both as a 2-pack, but I kind of had the feeling like maybe I was really eager to revisit Valley Girl, the original Valley Girl 83, but I was like, I don't know about this. So I went ahead and just rented them. I didn't want to. I was afraid of what might happen if I had that. When you make a purchase, everyone's must have done this at some point now. I'll make a purchase on a streaming platform. In this case, mine's iTunes or whatever used to be iTunes, and then there'll be that movie there. Like, why didn't I just rent that? Right. I could have just rented it. I only watched it once, but then it's there forever, just sitting there taunting me. And I knew that if I went for the 2-pack, Valley Girl 2020 was going to be the one, and it would have been. It was. I would not recommend that movie, sorry to say. And that, I'd love to know how much they spent on the soundtrack for that. Valley Girl 2020 as opposed to Valley Girl 83. There's most of the songs on the soundtrack are re-recordings or covers, and I know that it's typically less expensive to include a new recording or cover in a movie than it would be for the original track.
Right.
And I think that 250K, then you say, how much did what's that guy, Silent Bob,
Kevin Smith.
Didn't you tell me he paid about 250K just for one song? Or maybe more than that?
For Fleetwood Mac.
Yeah. Was it 250?
Yeah, I think he said it was.
Is that the magic number? Okay. Well, anyway, so that guy's throwing down like 250 for one song, one original song in the 2000s. So you got to imagine, like, in this Valley Girl 2020, it's chock full of 1980s hits, but almost none of them are by the original artists. Yeah.
Or from the original movie.
Or yeah, actually, from the original movie. That's true. I don't think a lot of them are intact. Anyway, well, you saw Valley Girl.
Yes.
Is music important to the plot?
It is, and it isn't at the same time. I think music is a big part of Nicolas Cage's character. You know, he introduces Julie and her friend to this dingy club where the Plimsolls are playing. So it's important to him. Apparently, people from the Valley don't go to concerts, or they don't go to, dingy clubs to watch concerts. So I guess in that way it's important. And then at the prom, I believe it's Josie Cotton who's playing their prom at the end of the movie. Sorry for the spoiler alerts, but the movie's almost 40 years old. So,
Yeah.
I think it's okay to spoil some plot points. But I believe the music is important to the characters. And, it's a pretty progressive soundtrack as far as what's on there. I don't know if I would consider this like an indie film. I believe MGM released it, but, for a studio film, it seems like it's a lot of underground artists. I know that Modern English hit Melt With You is used a couple times in the film, but for the most part, I think it's just that and like Electric Avenue, which are like super popular songs. Everything else seems to be more on the underground. Like it's not like the 2020 version where it just seems to be this, 80s hit compilation.
So, I do think that I Melt With You is retained in the remake.
But as a cover.
Yes. And again, like I can almost not help but give the spoilers here. So, all right, if you haven't seen Valley Girl 83 or Valley Girl 2020, maybe you want to hit pause here and go watch them. I don't know. The 2-pack's available on iTunes. Anyway, but I got to use a spoiler here because this is it's really odd. So, I Melt With You, I know it's on the soundtrack, Valley Girl. It was a hit song for Modern English. In the new one, there's a new plot wherein the character Randy, played by Nicolas Cage in 1983, so he has a band, and he ends up writing that song for Julie. And Rodney on the Rock, who was a real person, who probably spun I Melt With You back in the early 80s on K-Rock. Maybe some people heard it there for the first time. So anyway, Rodney on the Rock plays Randy's song, and it becomes a hit, and they run away together.
Wait, so Valley Girl 2020 still takes place in like the early 80s.
Now, here's the confusing part. So Valley Girl 2020, I read about this movie before I saw it a little bit, and I had to see it. And I've heard this device referred to as like the like what they do in the Princess Bride. You might know if there's a term for that, Ryan. When they're telling a story, but then the whole movie is the story. It's like sort of like bookended by like it's like the whole movie's a flashback,
Right.
basically. So I don't know what that's called, but they do it in this movie. And so the movie starts in the present day, but the present day is really like 2016 because the movie was shelved. But anyway, there's cell phones, there's chokers, there's a club, I don't know, there's graffiti. Like they it's present day. And so the movie starts in present day, and Julie, the mom, Julie's now a mom. Julie was the teenager from Valley Girl 83, but she's not played by the original actress. She's played by Alicia Silverstone. And so if you're trying to do the math, like Alicia Silverstone to be the parent of a teenager in 2017 who would have gone to high school in 1983 would have to be like in her early 50s. And so we know that Alicia Silverstone, I'm guessing she's maybe 40. This movie, it took me a while. I'm like, okay, wait, Alicia Silverstone's the mom. Is this still 1983? So the movie starts, it's like she's telling her daughter the story of how she met Randy, played by a nice young actor. I don't know who it is. I've never heard of him. And so she's telling her the story, but I'm thinking like, okay, this can't take place in 1983 anymore. There's no way. I mean, Alicia Silverstone is not old enough to have been a teenager in 1983. It's just not possible. So as the movie goes on, they start to give you clues like, oh yeah, this is definitely supposed to be the early 80s. They're not so subtle as like even Stranger Things to show you that it's the 80s. I mean, there's clues everywhere. You know, they have a costume party and like people are dressed like Magnum PI and Michael Jackson. I mean, there's like they're hitting you over the head. It's the early 1980s. Clueless, Alicia Silverstone, that's an iconic movie. She's will forever be known as that character as a teenager in 1995. So I know that it's impossible that she was a teenager in 1983. So like the suspension of disbelief is Alicia Silverstone is supposed to be the mom. I'm like, okay, fine.
Yeah, I'm guessing that's not the biggest. I'm guessing that's not the biggest issue you have with this movie. She's
older now. She's the mom. But this is like I'm like 2 minutes in this movie. I'm like, wait, what? What year is this? What's going on? And this is coming from, you know, I know the movie. So we get in there, and I'm not sure how soon you get there, but I mean they kind of take the story. You think it's going to be a pretty faithful remake of the original movie. Julie's the main character. She's got 3 friends. They all live in the San Fernando Valley. For listeners that aren't familiar with the Valley or what a Valley Girl is, I guess it was a phenomenon in the early 1980s. Were you familiar with like the term Valley Girl before seeing the movie, or how familiar are you with the idea of what a Valley Girl is?
Yeah, I knew what the Valley Girl stereotype was growing up. You know, they had a specific way they talked. They would, you know, dress super preppy. So I know what a Valley Girl referred to. I don't believe growing up I realized that it was specifically about San Fernando Valley.
Yes. Sherman Oaks pops in. There's a lot of things are shot on location in the original movie. And so Valley Speak, the only time Frank Zappa ever charted with a song, it was the song Valley Girl, which I believe predates the movie.
Correct. He tried to actually sue the movie for calling the movie Valley Girl.
Oh yeah, did he have a copyright on the term Valley Girl?
I'm not sure if it was about copyright or if there was some sort of defamation that they were, you know, tricking people into watching this movie, thinking he had something to do with it. I don't know the details of his legal action, but he definitely did not want his song to be associated with the movie.
And I'm sure that it couldn't help. You couldn't help but have them associated with each other. The song's called Valley Girl. The movie's called Valley Girl. I mean, as far as I know, I mean, I'm not old enough to have been a teen at that time, but I was certainly aware of Valley speak. I mean, it kind of swept the nation, really. It seemed like I'm really hesitating to not do like some like bad Valley Girl speak right now. But I think that really like the best example, like the best mainstream example of like what Valley Girl speak might be, to me has been Elvira, Mistress of the Dark. I mean, I'm from California, and I've never really known anybody to really speak that way. But then again, I didn't grow up in the greater Los Angeles area.
Right. So growing up outside of California in the Midwest, we basically would joke that all people from California talked like Valley girls, or at least all girls did. But we didn't know what the Valley was. We just said Valley girls are California girls, and they, have this very ditzy way about them. So that's why, like Cher from Clueless pops up in my mind, even though I was in California when Clueless came out. I just assumed like, oh, that's like I know that she's a Beverly Hills girl, but I was like, oh, she's kind of a Valley girl.
Right. Yeah, I mean the upper middle class or affluent young person and the Valley speak, I suppose. It was definitely used and exploited by Frank Zappa to whose daughter had been growing up in the area. I don't know if that's really what like carried it out to the farthest reaches of the U.S., along with mall culture and everything else that I would associate with like what a Valley girl means. Shopping at the mall. I guess it's like, speaking, there's like a lot of slang, hanging out with your friends, you speak in this particular way. Anyway, it's really evident in the first one. I think that the movie opens, they're shopping at the mall, they sit down, there's a hot dog on a stick in the food court of the Sherman Oaks Galleria, which is like pure Southern California. I mean, hot dog on a stick is, it started here, and it's just perfect. It's just sitting there subtly in the background, and then the actors start talking, and you're like, oh, okay, Valley Girl, that's what this is. So you're introduced to it and brought into it within the first couple of minutes of the movie.
Right.
With the second movie, think that there's a shopping montage. I think that that's how it works as well. But I didn't really think that they ever really went all in on the Valley speak. It's hard for me to think that they ever did it really at all. They didn't use a lot of slang. They didn't use a lot of the, that certain vocal inflection that you'd associate with it. And by the time they get to the scene at the beach, so there's a scene in both movies where the girls all go to the beach and they see the main love interest for the first time, but they don't know it. They kind of do that in both movies. It's like in the first movie, the actress that plays Julie sees a young, strapping Nicolas Cage on the beach, shirtless.
Right.
And in the remake, they see the Randy of the remake as well, but not before they burst into girls just want to have fun. So they like, I don't know what it's called when you spontaneously break into song. I guess like that's something that you typically see in a musical. But throughout the movie, they break into song, but sometimes there's source music, and then sometimes there's a band playing, but then sometimes they break into song. So there's like no like consistent way that like music is delivered in the remake. Whereas in a traditional film, you would have like source music, or like, I don't know what they call it when music just plays over the scene.
Like a montage?
Oh yeah, and then they do have like the montage, the interlude where all of this cool, fun action stuff happens. And there's some really good ones in the original, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. What's really enjoyable about the montages in the original, or just the scenery in the original, is this is what LA looked like in the 80s. It was cool to see, like, a lot of places that are still around. Like there's Dupar's, maybe not that specific Dupar's, but Dupar's is still an institution in LA. And to see a bunch of stuff on Hollywood Boulevard where you would have never imagined these things being able to, afford real estate in, the heart of Hollywood.
Oh yeah, there's a great scene where they're all driving down Sunset or Hollywood Boulevard or what have you, and they use the footage from that scene in the remake to make it look like they're driving through Hollywood in 1983. They use the same footage.
That's weird.
Yeah, it was weird. I think this is a podcast about music. I'm like tearing into this movie. Like it's like the first like 3 minutes of the movie that I talked about or something.
We're doing a scene by scene analysis of Valley Girl 2020.
Yes. So in essence, like, I mean, honestly, for me, I don't know how you feel. I don't know how you feel about it, but there's some songs better left in 1983.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, I've heard "I Melt with You" on the radio, like probably my entire life, and it's one of these things. It's one of these songs that, like, I know, like, if you really want to tear it apart, I mean, it has the sound of the early '80s, but something about it just is. I mean, it's just a good classic pop song.
I read a story that the director heard it on the radio. Director Martha Coolidge, she heard it on the radio, and she had called the radio station to ask what song that was, and they didn't know what she was talking about, so she had to like sing the melody to the DJ, and then the DJ told her, it's "Melt With You" by Modern English, and she just thought it needed to be in the movie, like it perfectly encapsulated like the vibe of the film. Mm-hmm. That's why it shows up twice. That's why it shows up over this montage of Julie and Randy falling in love, and also at the end of the film, kind of playing the movie out as it heads into the credits.
Sure, yeah, I don't know where that like how high on the charts that one was, but it was destined for greatness, just as Nicolas Cage was destined for greatness. Can you divorce like Nicolas Cage as you know him and so many other film roles?
In 2020, to watch Nicolas Cage in 1983 as a heartthrob, it's kind of funny.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, you could see. I mean, but he was so charming. Really, it couldn't have been 4 years later. He was in Moonstruck.
Obviously, we know that this movie launched Nicolas Cage's career.
Yeah.
I was kind of curious to see who else in the cast did anything substantial after this movie.
Absolutely no one.
Not a lot of recognizable faces.
No, maybe not.
But it turns out that the girl who played Lauren, one of the friends of Julie, she actually has a pretty interesting career as a voice actress and as a singer.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. So Elizabeth Daily, or E.G. Daily.
Ah,
Um,
that's
so
what the
she,
E stands for.
yeah, it stands for Elizabeth. So she went on to be Pee Wee's girlfriend in Pee Wee's Big Adventure. Is that the movie?
Yeah. Tim Burton.
And then she also became the voice of Tommy Pickles in Rugrats.
Hmm.
She was the voice of Babe Pig in the City in the second Babe movie. Or
No.
she was Babe. She isn't Babe in Babe 1.
She's
She is
Babe
Babe.
2.
She isn't Babe in Babe Pig in the City.
Pig in the City. The best babe there is.
I don't think I've seen either of them, so I'll take your
Oh,
word for it. But she had actually a decent singing career and showed up on The Voice in 2013.
really? The Voice has been around that long?
Yeah.
Wait, is it still on? I don't know.
2013 was the 5th season of The Voice.
Oh, what?
So I guess in the mid 80s, she actually had a major label deal with A&M Records, which no
Mm-hmm.
longer exists. But she actually had a Billboard Top 100 single.
Did she?
Yeah. She
Never knew.
she did backup vocals for an album from Human League frontman Philip Oakley. He did an album with Giorgio Moroder.
Cool.
Oh. She has a song on the Breakfast Club soundtrack.
No way.
Yeah.
Was this all as EG or as Elizabeth?
That I don't know. I would assume as EG.
I'm just only assuming that she's credited as Elizabeth Daily in Pee Wee's Big Adventure, but I don't know. E.G. Daily.
She has some songs in the Scarface movies.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
weird.
Her songs Shake It Up
I
and
see.
I'm Hot Tonight were included to the soundtrack of Scarface, and because of that, they show up in Grand Theft Auto 3.
Oh no way! I played that one.
So I understand like there's some context with the film I'm probably not getting in 2020. That is probably more par for the course of 1983. I just thought it was a movie that went to like really silly extremes. Like there was a lot more frontal nudity than I thought I was gonna see. But then
Fair enough.
But then also you have, I believe when Julie and her ex-boyfriend get back together, like she's at Dupar's and she's drinking strawberry milk.
Oh yeah, I saw that too. There's like clearly like some strawberry milk on the table.
And it's like it's a movie where people are like having sex and doing drugs, but also like she's so innocent that she's drinking strawberry milk.
Well, that makes me think like one of my favorite scenes of the movie is when they're all in the friend's bedroom. And then
Right.
like they're all talking and then they go in and like they try on the mom's lingerie. It's not as dirty as it sounds.
Right.
But it's like this movie, it's like almost like, dare I say, like an Altman movie. They're all in there, they're like talking, you can't really hear what everybody's saying, like the chip bag is rustling, you know, like it's just like it just seems like they really like let a camera roll and they're like, okay, just go.
Right. It felt like an
they're just like
it was an authentic teen girl scene, like what you would expect from like a teen girl sleepover. But then you have the party with like sushi catering.
Yeah. Like, is that like the opulence of middle class Encino or Sherman Oaks or something that I just don't get?
Yeah, I was like, who in high school is like, let's have a party, let's get sushi.
Now, I think that it's the parents are hosting the party for them. And I say this because I really didn't notice it, or I was looking for it because when I watched these movies, I watched 2020 first, and then as a palate cleanser, I watched the original. And so E.G. Daily, as we'll call her, is throwing a party. She makes a brief cameo. She's throwing the costume party. And in the first one, it's not a costume party, but Randy, Nicolas Cage, says, what? If I would have known this was a costume party, I would have, whatever. Like he's making fun of like the preppiness of the scene, So they literally made it a costume party for the remake.
But also because they needed
like,
to show the 80s.
because they needed to show it was the 80s. But it's like the parents in the remake it's obvious that the parents are like they do like a smash cut or something where it's like the dad is the parent, like it's E.G. Daily and then some dude, and it's like they're like terrible parents that are throwing like a big pool party with a bunch of booze. But I saw something, and I don't know, I can't quote it, but that the director of Valley Girl, I had a connection with Francis Ford Coppola in the mid 70s.
Yeah, she worked at Zoetrope Studio.
Okay. So, like, as a film that, like, uses music to drive the plot, I mean, do you think it does a good job?
I do. And I think one of the reasons Nicolas Cage is so compelling in this film is because they tie him to, like, this underground music scene.
Now, in the underground music scene here, it's like mostly it's the Plimsouls.
It's mostly the Plimsouls, but it's kind of to show the differences between their two worlds. I think the Plimsouls kind of represent basically like non-radio pop.
Yeah.
Like non-radio music. It's the underground.
Yeah. Yeah. He calls what they listen to in the Valley, he calls it, I think, techno rock. And so he's listening to Plimsouls. Aside from I Melt With You, the kind of like the other theme of the movie, it's A Million Miles Away is what the Plimsouls are singing. Like, right. Which is like, I think the song that's playing when he and Julie first go to the club.
Yes. And then also after they break up, he stumbles drunkenly back into the club. And is it before he makes out with his ex-girlfriend or after? But basically it kind of bookends the beginning and the end of Julie.
Yeah. And so I think you're saying something about Nicolas Cage and the music, but you see, I mean, he was a good actor even then. I mean, he just makes a face I think that Tyra Banks calls it, he's smizing, he's like, he just does this thing with his eyes. And then when he hears the music and then like, oh yeah, like everything ties together. I mean, it's a little on the nose, like A Million Miles Away, but I mean, it's effective.
Yeah. And I think it's a testament to his acting ability. Like, it seems like he authentically likes the Plimsouls.
Yeah, now they're all in the Valley and they're listening to like Josie Cotton, which I don't know what her career looked like. And she was playing this music. It's like Phil Spector inspired, like even like maybe Beach Boys inspired. Like it's very retro, like 50s, 60s music for the early 1980s. And then they're also like dancing to like an LA band called the Sparks, who are, I think, like a regional favorite. Had you heard of the Sparks before Valley Girl?
I think I am aware of them in a very uncool way. I know of Sparks because they did a collaboration album with Franz Ferdinand a few years ago.
Oh yeah, I am aware of that. That's right.
And so listening to Sparks on the soundtrack playlist, I was like, I can understand why Franz Ferdinand would want to collaborate with them. Like I see a lot of Sparks influence in the Franz Ferdinand sound. Not that I'm a huge Franz Ferdinand fan. I'm not a huge Franz Ferdinand fan, but I can understand why that pairing made sense.
Anyway, in the Valley Girl 2020, I felt they were really lazy with the costuming, honestly.
It sounds like they were really lazy in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it didn't look like, I felt like, oh, this is new stuff that they're hoping like will read old. I'm going to bring up Stranger Things again. Like there's a Stranger Things way of doing it where it's like 80s. Hey, I've got my I've got my yeah. Oh, I'm going to carry my Teddy Ruxpin while I'm drinking a Coke a new Coke.
A doll of the Noid.
I've got a Noid T-shirt on, and I've got the new Coke, and I'm holding my Teddy Ruxpin, and I put the soundtrack to Back to the Future in the Teddy Ruxpin. I use it as a Walkman, and I use it like real Sony Walkman headphones. Anyway, so that's like the Stranger Things way of doing it. It's like that overload of like 1980s signifiers, like Ready Player One style. And then like this, I mean, they did it in the laziest way. So they had the costume party to say, hey, this is the 80s. Let's check out these costumes. We've got like I mentioned, like for whatever reason, like the obvious Magnum PI and the Michael Jackson stick out. And so, but then after that, I felt like they were really confused. It was really difficult to like make it visually like seem like the 80s. But that's where the soundtrack comes in. So soundtrack for Valley Girl 2020 is all like, they do keep the Plimsolls Million Miles Away. They keep I Melt With You, of course. They use it to eat. They rewrite history and say that the person Randy wrote I Melt With You. They refer specifically to K-Rock. And they have an actor, it might even be like one of the guys from The State, playing Rodney on the Rock. Like, Rodney on the Rock's here. He's going to play some records for us. And which is very strange because it's just like all this layer of like, okay, there's an actor playing a real guy, and then an actor who's playing a guy in this remake of a movie as it's being bookended by a story. Fake wrote I Melt With You after it already existed. It's just like, what's going on? It just doesn't make any sense to me. So that was my experience with that movie, but they really keep it tight with the expected 1980s songs. We Got the Beat by the Go-Go's, Bad Reputation by Joan Jett, Girls Just Want to Have Fun, which they do break out into song at the beach. Kids in America by Kim Wilde. When Randy crashes the costume party, he starts singing You Might Think by the Cars. Oh, no, wait. Or maybe he sings Magic by the Cars. At some point, he sings two Cars songs. But also, he is in a band. And so then instead of the Plimsolls or something else being at the club, it's Randy's band.
Where he writes I Melt With You.
Where he writes I Melt With You. And at some point, I think they do a punk rock version of a Madonna song. And when they do these covers, they all sound like 90s pop punk. So it's very confused. Tainted Love's on the soundtrack. I mean, Space Age Love Song, Flock of Seagulls. I mean, this is just your classic. Take On Me. The Safety Dance. I mean, if you name like an 80s pop hit, I mean, it's on the soundtrack in some form or another. It's just everything you'd know. So we're talking about how the Plimsolls are in the first one, and they're like, Randy and Julie have this connection. The first time they really hang out together at the club, the Plimsolls are playing A Million Miles Away. So they just have a different band for no reason. And maybe it's an all-girl band playing X-Ray Specs. And speaking of girls, Mae Whitman kind of takes the role of Randy's friend, Nicolas Cage's friend. What's his name?
I think it's Fred.
Okay, Fred. Now, I didn't catch the name of the character in this one, but the role of Fred is split between two people. There's a dude who is way super punk rock, and I think it might be the lobby boy from Grand Budapest. Yeah, his brother. I think it's his brother. And then Mae Whitman, as we all know and love from Arrested Development and
Scott Pilgrim.
One of my favorite movies, to with music for sure. And so the Fred duties are split between these two people. She's the bass player in the band.
Let's get back to the soundtrack because I don't want to hear about this movie anymore.
Okay. Okay, man.
So 2020 has like this cornucopia of just 80s pop songs, like really obvious 80s pop songs. And I really hate it when movies do this, where they have to just hit you over the head with popular songs of the era of that era. Ready Player One is another one of those movies that you mentioned where I feel like,
oh yeah,
you know, even though I enjoyed the movie, I felt like they did that a lot in Captain Marvel.
You took the words right out of my mouth, Ryan. Same.
You know, it's like, oh, I crash landed in front of a Blockbuster Video, and then I remember we were in the car once, and I think I had seen the movie, and you hadn't seen it yet, and I was like, yeah, I like the movie, but the music is a little on the nose. You know, it's just basically hitting you over the head with the fact that they're in the 90s. And you said, why did they play like garbage or something? And I said, yes, they did. And I feel like it's that same thing where it's just like, what is like the obvious, you know, it's a movie about the 90s and she's a female superhero, so she's tough, so it's got to be rock. So what can we think of? And it's like, you know, Garbage and Hole and Elastica.
Yeah. And you know, the only now it was a surprise to hear Nirvana on that soundtrack.
So my theory is because Elastica and Garbage and Hole are all on the same label with Nirvana, that they basically just like if you want this Nirvana song, like you just got to pay for like this whole package of songs.
Butch Big must have made a pretty penny off of Captain Marvel if he had anything to do with it.
Right, because he's also in Garbage. But
Geffen, DGC though, you're right. I didn't even think of that.
I mean, that's what's kind of refreshing about the 1983 version. Maybe it was because of the budget constraints, but they didn't just throw a bunch of pop songs at you.
Yeah, it's odd. It's better off for it, but it has meant that even though they haven't done that, I've heard conflicting reports that the movie's intact depending on how you see it. I think when they broadcast it on television, they have to block out some of the songs. A lot of the music in the movie is unavailable for streaming as well. And so, but I agree. I like to be surprised and not hear the same thing used in the same way.
Yeah, and even if they had budget constraints with the 1983 version, people sought out that soundtrack, and that's why they came up with those reissues in the mid-90s.
Yes, sir.
Like that music really touched people, where they wanted that soundtrack, and that's why they're downloading your playlists off of Apple Music and Spotify.
Yeah, I've got this idea that every weekend, like I figured that the first time I saw this movie, there's only two ways I could have seen it. It was either on VHS, recommended from a friend, or edited for content on TBS. And so I just have this fantasy, like I know it's like not 1993 anymore, but I feel like it's like, oh, like my playlist, I get these alerts like every weekend, Valley Girl, downloaded by so-and-so or saved by so-and-so. I just think like, oh, it must be on TBS. Some of the Josie Cotton songs, and I mean, who seems to have just faded into obscurity. Bonnie Hayes, which I don't know. I'm not familiar with the work of Bonnie Hayes outside this movie, but these are really like interesting, good songs. And like, I feel like they fit the tone of the movie. Like it's women singing. There's like, just like this element of just like carefree California, but it's not, there's something a little more interesting about it than like you might have found with like Debbie Gibson or something. Like I want to show that it's like not that kind of like 80s pop. It's like there's just like this something different to it. You know, there's something kitschy about it. There's some sort of like, it's just really odd, interesting music. And I wish that more people could hear it.
Well, that was a very thorough breakdown of two Valley Girl movies. Thank you, Damon, for being the guest this week.
Oh, thank you, Ryan. My pleasure. Oh yeah, and I wanted to say, if I didn't before, that.
Well, if you guys are interested in music Damon makes, you can still check out the Visitors Queue on Spotify. You can check out Joy Luck Division. We'll have music up at some point. But you can also check out movie soundtrack playlists that Damon makes on Apple Music or on Spotify. And he also makes playlists for the podcast episodes, even the ones that he's not on, featuring music or bands that we talk about on each episode. So check those out on the soundtrackyourlife.net webpage. But thanks for coming by, Damon. We'll do this again soon.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thanks for joining us this week on Soundtrack Your Life. Make sure to visit our website, soundtrackyourlife.net, where you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. While you're at it, if you found value in the show, we'd appreciate a rating. Or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too.